Essentially, I started making or writing these songs over the last like 2 and a bit years. I took a bit of time off of like working on music completely. Other parts of my life just ended up having to take precedence. Both my parents ended up getting pretty sick. I devoted my time to full time care. And honestly, in that situation, writing was the last thing on my mind, or just even pursuing anything like that was. Then slowly but surely, the songs around that time just started kind of trickling in after my dad died, and then yeah, started writing them. I guess then around 2 ish years ago, and then made it in. We made the EP in around like we did the bulk of it in around 2 or 3 weeks time out here in Vancouver. I worked with a good friend of mine, Shane Stevenson, on the record, and yeah, it came together quite quickly in those 2 weeks, and then we did the rest remotely while I was still living out in Frankfurt. Definitely nervous. Yeah, kind of having taken it was like from like my last release before the first single for this EP. It was about like 3 years ish, so it felt like doing it all over again in a certain way. Like everything felt fresh and new, but in a way that also kind of like carried a bit of like discomfort for sure. I think it really kind of changes a bunch, and I think experimental is a good way of putting that without trying to sound too self-indulgent, I suppose. But I don't know. I think I've been gravitating more and more towards art that doesn't necessarily, or like towards people that don't necessarily, I guess, yearn for like this like cohesiveness in like a sonic way all the time everywhere. It's one of those things where sometimes like you have this thing like in bands a lot where you talk about serving the song as a musician, and that's kind of what it is. And it's been just trying to like bring that into the studio environment, if that makes sense. Just in the sense that like maybe this song is meant to just be a little sad folk song, and this next one maybe yeah gets a little more into the electronica infused kind of side. I am a big proponent of not bringing songs into the studio overcooked. Every now and again, like I'll bring like a pretty like produced out demo in, and we'll work on that, and then that kind of guides the process. And I guess I'm a little more restricted because of kind of the work that I've put in before that. I try to just not get in my own way. Yeah, that's a really great question because I don't think it's necessarily something that, especially when it comes to the creative process, is something I think about a lot. What's drawn me to continue to try and like feed this project or like keep it going and do more things is the process, right? I think it's when I we started like when we first made the first EP. It was us in a room with like friends that I met back at university, and just kind of keeping that vibe of just wanting to make things with your friends, and whatever comes out of that is kind of yeah, that'll be okay, you know. Um, yeah, and I think yeah, most of my writing tends to be quite autobiographical in that way in the first place, and I it's something I've struggled with a lot because, of course, I like a lot of my writing doesn't tend to be as like flowery or metaphorical as like a lot of the music that, especially if you look at like my sonic references and things like that, would usually be. Like, I I'm a huge fan of like I mean your classic like white soft indie boy guys. You know, like whether that's someone like Justin Vernon, of course, or whether that's like a James Vincent McMorrow kind of thing. There, it's a lot of writing that's often really shrouded in metaphor, and that's something that I've never really like been able to lean into in the same way. But but yeah, I don't know. I think and it sounds really like a cutter answer that like everyone will probably give, but like it's the genuineness or the honesty of like trying to not filter myself through that process too much. I mean, I grew up. Both of my parents were super into kind of the whole like '60s folk thing. I yeah, just talk to me about Paul Simon and I'm excited, right? But like for instance, or even like more of the Simon and Garfunkel stuff. Like Only Living in Boy in New York was like one of those songs where it just kind of like clicked and just made sense. It was like this, yeah, I get it. Or like, and I don't know, sometimes I think that was one of those moments for sure where it just, it was like, I kind of want to do that, which is a really neat thing. I came to it quite late. Like, I didn't start playing guitar until like I was around 15, 16, and for me, that's still always kind of been like more of a vessel to write songs as opposed to really like being a very accomplished guitarist by any means. Like, I'm not great at it in like the technical sense. It's enough to write songs, and I think in that vein, that's kind of who I've or those are the types of people that I end up just kind of gravitating towards, or just people that craft really nice songs. I don't know. Um, but yeah, in terms of things that have inspired me that I kind of always come back to, it changes a lot, but I'm an obsessive listener in the sense that I'll have like a record that I won't like that I'll listen to and I won't listen to anything else for like a couple months. Oh yeah. Yeah. And when I first started putting out music, was around the time when 22 a million came out, like that Bon Iver record. And that for me, like, was one of the, and the thing is, like, looking back at it now, it's not necessarily maybe quite as groundbreaking in the large scale of things as I thought it was back then, in the sense that, I mean, it's very cool, and there's probably like a conversation to be had about kind of tastes in misogyny in music, that this Bon Iver record was hailed as that, and like rightly so. Whereas it's something that someone like Bjork's been doing for goodness knows how much time, right? But at the time, that was one of those records for sure. 22 million was, and now, like, just to go back to kind of what I was saying earlier about not really limiting yourself in terms of like genre and stuff. A record that like shifted the way that I understood music like that very recently, even though it came out I think a couple years ago now. And I was just very very late to the party. Was the Dijon album? 1,000,000% the Dijon album. It's about staying humble and just trying to write as much as I can. I want to just like keep putting out as much music that I'm stoked about and proud of as I can. Like, we've just already wrapped tracking for the next EP, and I'm writing for the next one. Just kind of doing that. But I mean, in terms of lofty goals, right? Like, I mean, there's one of the big ones would definitely be somehow in any shape or form figuring out kind of working with like, I mean, the dream, like the dream would be working with someone like Aaron Dessner for a bit. Like, I think the whole like Long Pond studio vibes thing, what that he's been doing with everyone and their moms, and it's been great, and I've loved every single moment of all of it. A big one here in Vancouver would definitely, not like we've played there before, but just coming back and like getting to do it again with a full band would be this place called the Fox Cabaret out here, which is, it's a small venue. I couldn't tell you what the cap is. I was just out there yesterday for a show. I went and saw a field guide out there, who's very very cool and an old kind of friend. But no, that place, because the history behind it also in terms of like what it meant or means to the city is kind of cool. It used to, back I think in the 70s or 80s, be an old porn theater, and it's now just like become this really nice like cozy yeah, like venue where people come and play. That's like an immediate one that I'd love to do at some point in the near future. And as of otherwise, honestly, I just love to play as much as I can anywhere and everywhere that'll have me in a lot of ways. I don't know. Yeah, it's definitely something I've learned to kind of deal with a little more. A couple years ago, or like around like the 2017, 2018 mark, we actually ended up making a full length record that's not gonna see the light of day for exactly those reasons, right? Just doing that, and yeah, I don't know. I think it took me a long time to understand that like what people bring, like in terms of like their abilities or their tastes into music is like very, very different. There's like so many different avenues of coming at it, right? It's one of those things like there's so many different ways of making music and what that means. And yeah, that's something I definitely had to get, and I didn't for a while. For this batch of songs, I really went like about a year and a half or two where I barely wrote a song at all. Um, it just wasn't happening for me in a certain. I don't know why. I mean, I'm sure I have my suspicions, my conversations with my therapist that will probably have like unearthed it a little bit, but yeah, I think for me a big part of it is just trying to keep it fresh all the time. And I do a lot of the very classic like writing of just sitting at a guitar or at the piano and just sitting and writing. But I tend to fall into writing the same song a lot if I keep doing that. And yeah, so it's been trying to switch it up and like vary things in different ways, whether that's picking up a different instrument, whether that's writing just in the DAW and just like writing on my computer completely, or whether that's like having no, yeah, whether that's like chipping away at a song like for like a few months on end. Like it just kind of, they come in all shapes and sizes. In terms of like structure to the process, like I like to think that there is a bit of like method to the madness where I don't really write full songs a lot often. I'm a big believer, at least in the first instance, of writing sections, and I write like whether that's a chorus here, a verse here, and then sometimes like you hear those stories of like a lot of writers finishing like dozens of songs for this EP or for this record, and only an X amount make the cut. And like I liken my curation process to that kind of, but I don't do that for full songs. I do that for these sections. So I'll write like maybe like 20 choruses, and then I'll like whittle down what I like, or I'll pick this verse that I think, oh, this really hits, and then I'll move on from that. Like my curation's just part of the creation process. As like often is the case with men, and like growing up with male role models from like maybe generations like a little prior, like my even like especially with my dad, like this is something that I really really noticed. He was an older Spanish man. He grew up during kind of the time when Franco was still alive in Spain. Like he was 18 when Franco died, and just kind of because of that, like this like a general kind of air of machismo and whatever is still super super rampant in a lot of Spanish culture. And that definitely kind of transitioned in a lot, or I guess that was kind of passed on to me, like, and in a lot of ways, like very early on, I was really lucky that for the most part I was raised by women, and like my mom did most of the childcare. My sister's still a huge a person that I look up to a lot. It afforded me like the emotional availability that I wouldn't have perhaps had otherwise, looking at kind of my environment sometimes. Uh, and the way that I learned to do that, I think, very early on was through song. I started writing songs at like 13, 14, and I've been doing it ever since. And that's just kind of been way before I finally bit the bullet and went to therapy. That was kind of how I learned to put like words to where I was at. And a lot of the time, especially growing up, that was really helpful. It becomes tougher when you're then making art that is so straight to the point, let's put it, like conversational, like I said, not shrouded in metaphor much. And yeah, I mean, I've lost both of my parents over the last 2 years, and writing about that is something that helps a lot. But the process of like being in the studio and revisiting that and like even marketing these songs, right? Of course, that's tough. Of course, that's difficult. So it's all of the above in a way that I'm not sure I've worked out just yet. One of them that's out already that I think is a big one for me was functional. It just kind of like I said earlier, mm, kind of my relationship with my dad was is a bit fractured at best. Like, and Yeah, like I think he could have been alive for another 30 or 40 years and we would have never had the conversations that could have maybe helped reconcile that relationship in a way that would have been meaningful, right? And for me, like that was the closest thing that I'll get to closure uh, in in that relationship was getting to sit down and write that song. And yeah, I don't know. I think it's one of those things where that one was really, really important for me, and I like it too, and it sounds nice. So that's all. That's all I can ask for, I guess.